going to spend a few minutes today talking about crime and deviance from a sociological perspective. Now, criminologists are specialized sociologists, so criminology as a study falls under the broader discipline of sociology. But we want to talk specifically today about some of the criminological theories that are contained in the field of sociology. So we're going to talk today specifically about some of the theories that are contained in this broad area of criminology and the study of crime and deviance in society. And there are some questions that you should probably be thinking about as you're understanding these theories. When does conformity verge on deviance? How does a society manage to control its members and then convince them to conform to its rules, its laws, its standards, its norms? And then finally, what are the consequences of deviant behavior? So first, let's start off with a couple of little definitions here. The first of those is social control. These are techniques and strategies which prevent deviant behaviors in a society. And so these are the things that force you, so to speak, to obey others and to do what others want you to do. And we have a lot of agents of socialization that help to work in tandem to keep those social controls in place. We obey our parents, we obey our teachers, we listen to our peers, sometimes to our own demise. We do what our bosses tell us in the workplace. We conform to governmental rules and regulations. All of these things are techniques that society, the structure of society, uses to help prevent deviance from occurring. And crime, right? Deviance and crime are intimately linked to each other. And we also then should briefly define conformity, obedience, and social control. Conformity is going along with those who have really no special right to direct our behavior. And this usually does happen with our peer groups. These are people that tell us what to do and how to do it, and we follow along with them because we want to be part of that group. So we conform to the norms or the standards of the group. Obedience goes a step farther than that. This is where we comply with authorities, we comply with rules and regulations. Obedience can happen in the workplace. It can happen when you're the child in a family, or it can happen when you're sometimes the wife or husband in a family because one of those members in that intimate relationship has more power and control over the other. This can happen also with our government. Our government forces us to be obedient members of society by complying with rules, regulations, by writing us traffic tickets when we get pulled over, by telling us what we can and cannot do in social settings. Now, social controls can be informal or formal. Right? Informal social controls are used very casually to enforce norms. An example of this might be a parent that's out to dinner with their children and the children start to misbehave a little bit, and the parent gives the child that parent look, the raised eyebrow, the stern look at the child as if to tell the child, you better stop that right now. That's an informal social control. Formal social controls are carried out by authorized agents. As I mentioned before, this is the cop that writes you the traffic ticket because you were speeding. This is the boss that calls you into the office and tells you that certain behaviors are inappropriate for the workplace. And it really is important for us to note that the interplay between informal and formal social control is very important to understand. Sometimes informal and formal social control lines up together so that you have the informal, for example, what's happening in your family or with your peers, enforcing the formal. So let's say we have a law against marijuana smoking in society, and your peer group also says this is bad, you should not be doing it. This is an example of the interplay lining up to enforce each other. But let's assume that we have that law that says you may not smoke marijuana, but you have a group of peers who say it's all right to do this. This is an example of when the interplay may not line up, and it may force you as an individual to make a decision that goes against either the informal or formal social controls. And of course, there is a theory that we can use to describe social control. Of course, control theory. Our connection to others in society leads us to conform to the norms of our society. And so this theory, when we're talking about specifically law and society, focuses on why some people conform and others choose not to. And it also says that if left to our own devices, all of us would deviate, and that's why we have to have laws. And I think if you take a minute to consider whether or not you would deviate from some of the laws that we have in our society, you probably will find that you will. Do you ever go above the speed limit while you're driving? Well, if that's the case, then you're deviating from a formal law that we have in our society. Now, your peers may say, hey, it's okay, but we still have that formal law in place. So this theory, control theory, wants to know, why are you willing to bend or break the rules and other people may not be? And so this theory says that what causes that behavior is the absence of control. So then you say to yourself, well, look, we do have a control. There is a speed limit. It is posting, but I'm still breaking it. Well, I think hand in hand with that, you have to consider, do you get caught? And so there's a stake there. Your behavior is attached to whether or not you have something to lose. So you're driving down the road, you're doing 5 or 10 miles an hour above the speed limit, and you have to make a decision. Am I going to get caught or am I not going to get caught? And if you feel like you're going to get caught, you're likely to keep your speed close to the speed limit. However, if you feel like you're not going to get caught, maybe you've done this many times and not gotten caught, you're more likely to engage in that deviant behavior. So the focus here is our attachment to or our involvement with the belief of a normal society, and that's control theory. And control theory is kind of one of those overarching theories that is used in the field of criminology. We also need to define deviance and crime, the differences and similarities in these two terms. Deviance is generally behavior that violates standards or expectations. It often involves violating group norms, and it's important to note that it is subject to context and time. And one of the easiest examples I can give you is body piercing. 20 or 30 years ago, it was considered deviant to have any kind of piercing other than that which might be in your ears. Today, it's normal. It's no longer considered deviant behavior. Tattoos are also something that you can think of in terms of deviance or not. 100 years ago, a tattoo might have been considered a horrible thing to do to your body. However, today, it's an accepted form of self-expression, and rarely do people consider it to be deviant when a person gets a tattoo. Crime, however, is a violation of law, and formal penalties will apply if you break the law. So deviance may be criminal, but crime is always deviant. So now that we've got the definitions out of the way, let's move on to some criminological theories that we use in the field of sociology. And the first we're going to start with is the group of theories that fall under the broader functional perspective. So now remember, functional theory was the very first sociological theory that we had. And so theories that fall under the functional umbrella that relate to crime and deviance have a very, very long history. And they go back all the way to Durkheim. Emile Durkheim and his concept of anomie. And so we can relate the concept of anomie to crime and deviance because Durkheim would have said that social controls become ineffective when people have or feel or experience high levels of anomie. Now remember, anomie occurs when there's a loss of direction in society. And so the structure or the hierarchy or the rules or regulations start to break down and they become ineffective, and people start to consider that they can do or need to do things that go against the social norms, things that break the rules, in order to benefit their own self. So Durkheim said that punishments established within a culture help define what acceptable behavior is, and that they also help to contribute to social stability. And so when you live in a culture or in a society or in a time where there are serious problems to the structure of society, such as a war or a revolution or a military coup d'etat, something like that, you have these really high levels of feeling like the structure is no longer there to support you or to punish you, to sanction you. And so what Durkheim would have said is that when these controls become ineffective, the chances of deviant or criminal behavior occurring are much higher in a society. Contemporarily, Robert Merton, also a functional theorist, took Durkheim's work and developed it a little bit farther. And he developed it into his deviance typology, also known as strain theory, also known as the enemy theory of deviance. And essentially what Merton was interested in here was how people adapt in certain ways by conforming to or deviating from cultural expectations. And so he sets up this chart, and he talks about the need in a society to accept the cultural goals and to accept the institutionalized means to get to the goal. So let me give you an example here. In American society, one of the goals that we have is to accumulate wealth. And the ways that we get there, the legitimate institutionalized ways that we get there, are perhaps working hard, playing the stock market, reaping the benefit of having a wealthy relative who dies and leaves us money. All of these are legitimate ways to reach the goal of being wealthy. And so most of us will fall into that conformist category. However, he said, there are other categories or groups of people who don't want to either accept the means, the legitimate way to get there, or accept the goal, the end game. And he calls them innovators, ritualists, retreatists, and rebels. So we'll talk about these quickly one at a time. The innovator. The innovator rejects the way to get to the goal, but they internalize the goal. They still want the wealth that American society holds to be important, but they don't want to do the hard work, and they don't have any other legitimate way to get there. And so they innovate a new way to get to the wealth. This might be your friendly neighborhood drug dealer. This is a person whose legitimate means have been blocked by the structure of society. They have tried the legitimate way, but it's just simply not working for them, and so they innovate a new way to get there. The ritualist. The ritualist is interesting in that they reject the goal. They don't care about the wealth, but they have internalized the means. So they're willing to work hard, they're willing to put forth effort, they're willing to do everything that society tells them to do to be a good functioning member of society, and money is not that important to them. Oftentimes you find people in this category who have very altruistic types of jobs. Firefighters, nurses, law enforcement officers, teachers, people who aren't going to make buckets of money in their lifetime. However, they do the work because they've internalized that work is important. The retreatist is somebody who rejects the means and rejects the goals. And I oftentimes think about this group of people as kind of the 40-year-old pot-smoking hippie that still lives at home in mom and dad's basement, and they're perfectly happy there. They don't really have a job. They might do some day labor occasionally just to make some money so that they can buy their bag of weed. They're happy sitting at home most days, playing video games and eating Cheetos. You know the person that I'm describing here. Mom and dad are doing the laundry and paying the bills, so there's no point in doing anything any different. And so they've rejected the means, they've rejected the goals. they're perfectly happy to live in the structure of our society. They're not making waves in that respect, but they really have retreated from that internalization of accepting the legitimized means and the legitimized goals that our society has put in place for them. Now, the final category is the rebel. The rebel is like the retreatist, but they go many, many steps farther in that not only do they reject the means and reject the goals, but they actually work hard to try and change the structure of society. And this category contains people like terrorists or anarchists, people who are willing to actually put into place things that they are willing to do to change the structure of society and make it what they want it to be. So these are a couple of our functional theories with regard to criminal and deviant behavior. And I'll take a minute here to say, I think the reason why we have so many well-developed, as you will see, theories that fall under each one of our major sociological theories in the field of criminology is because there really isn't one theory that will satisfactorily address why crime or deviance occurs. And so oftentimes, as a student of criminology or a student of sociology, you really have to use multiple theories at multiple levels of analysis to describe the complete picture of why crime and deviance is occurring. So these functional theories happen at the macro level. And that has been one of the problems with Merton's typology, in that it doesn't really capture every single type of person or individual who lives in a society. However, it does give us a good broad overview and a possibility for trying to categorize why crime occurs. Likewise with Durkheim. Durkheim says enemy causes crime. Merton says goals and means and your acceptance or rejection of them causes crime. All right, so now we'll talk a little bit about conflict theory. Conflict theory talks about people with power wanting to protect their own interests, and so it's interested in how deviant or criminal behavior occurs with regard to issues related to, at its broadest perspective, race, class, and gender. And so conflict theorists have come up with this idea of differential justice. Differential justice talks about the different ways in which social control is exercised over different groups in society. This theory says that the poor are more likely to deviate or commit crime to meet their basic needs. And there's a connection here to Robert Merton's deviance typology, in that Merton said that the poor will deviate when their access is blocked. Their legitimate access to the goals and means is blocked, and so they deviate to meet those basic needs. Differential justice says that the wealthy deviate to maintain their power, and so the wealthy are willing to use deviance to maintain their position over others in society, right? And so, for an example, wealthy people are often in a position where they can create laws or where they can lobby our government to influence them to decide things in a particular way. The poor don't have that kind of power in society. And so wealthy people oftentimes can get away with framing their deviance in a way that makes it seem like it is not deviant. And this is the concept of differential justice. There's a difference in the way that deviance and crime are framed regarding to issues of stratification in a society. Now, as you already know from studying sociology, feminist theory is a sub-theory of conflict perspective. And feminist theorists, when we're talking about crime and deviance, are really concerned with how society treats men and women stereotypically and how that is interpreted in the criminal justice system. So, what are our cultural attitudes toward women and men, and how does that influence how each group is perceived and labeled with regard to deviance and crime. And we know that, for example, from research, women tend to be seen as victims rather than perpetrators of crime. We also have examined chivalry theory, which reinforces the subordination of women in society. Chivalry theory deals with how women use their quote-unquote feminine wiles to get out of being charged with criminal behavior or deviant behavior. Chivalry theory would say that using your femininity to advance your place in society is probably not the best way to find solutions to stereotypical attitudes within the criminal justice system. And again here, we're just scraping the surface with regard to some of these criminology theories that fall under the broader perspective of conflict. We also need to talk about interaction theory, and this is where it gets a little bit more complex because there are a lot of theories that fall to that interactionist realm. Now, remember, interactionist theory is at the micro level, meaning that it gets down to that more intimate perspective and talks about how individuals react and act, what their feelings and beliefs are, and how that helps to eventually change the structure of society. And so I've put up here a couple of the most important ones. We'll take them one at a time quickly. Cultural transmission theory, also known as differential association, talks about how exposure to crime can help to shape our attitudes about it and may encourage us to deviate. And so if you are exposed repeatedly to crime over and over and over again, and you are told that that behavior is not inappropriate, then chances are you may also engage in that behavior. You grow up in a family of criminals, you see them committing crime every single day, and you don't see anything wrong with that. All behavior, according to cultural transmission theorists, is learned, and this includes deviant and criminal behavior. Social disorganization theory talks about how when social norms and rules deteriorate, crime increases. But it's not at the macro level, right? This does sound very similar to the work of Durkheim with the concept of anomie, but it looks at the individual, and it looks at when that individual is willing to deviate from the norms as the structure starts to deteriorate. And we have to be really careful here not to blame the victim. This theory really talks about how when communal relationships and social institutions aren't doing their job, the individual is more likely to contribute to criminal or deviant behavior. So increases in crime occur when there's a lack of uniformity at the community level, and this one goes all the way back, has its roots essentially in the Industrial Revolution and how that disintegrated people from their communities, and then crime started to increase. So the focus of this theory is the absence of constraint and how that absence of constraint influences individual behavior. Labeling theory, also known as social reaction approach. Now, this one can get used at the micro or the macro level. However, we're going to talk about it here just at the interaction level. Why do some people get the deviant label and others don't? And what are the implications of that for the individual? This theory says that deviance is a social process by which some are able to label others, primarily those that have power, and they are able to give others labels and enforce them. Labeling theorists don't like labels, but they say that labeling is a social fact, especially when we're talking about crime and deviance. And so, for example, if an individual does get caught committing a criminal act, they get the label of criminal. And what does that do to that person over time? We need to consider that the label may influence future behaviors. The final interactionist theory that I want to talk about is social construction theory, and this is a postmodern interaction theory. It talks about deviance being a product of the culture in which we live, and so the focus in this theory is about the decision-making process. How does decision-making create a deviant identity? And you can see how this is a very micro-level theory in that it's really concerned with how the individual identity is constructed in a deviant manner, and further, who is the person or who is responsible for constructing that deviant identity. Okay, so quick recap here. We talked about functional theory, we talked about Durkheim, and we talked about Merton, and we talked about some of the issues that anomie causes for society, and we talked about some of those different types of groups who may choose to engage in criminal or deviant behavior or not. When we talked about conflict theory, we talked about differential justice, about how different groups in our heavily stratified society deviate to maintain power or to meet needs. We also talked under conflict theory briefly about feminist theory, the notion of chivalry theory that falls under that, and how women and men have different experiences in our criminal justice system. And then finally, we talked about 4 of the primary interactionist approaches: cultural transmission, social disorganization, labeling, and social constructionist theories. I hope this helps you to understand a little bit better some of the sociological perspectives of deviance. Remember, these are just a tip of the iceberg. There are many, many theories out there, and you're encouraged to do some homework and to find out more about sociological theory on crime and deviance. Take care. Bye-bye.